It's April 30th, 1943. A fisherman off the coast of Spain pulls something unexpected from the waters. A human body, dressed in a Royal Marines uniform, a briefcase chained to his wrist. The local authorities are called. The British vice-consul is notified. And soon, these documents make their way into the hands of German intelligence. What the Nazis don't know is that they've just fallen for one of the most audacious deceptions in military history. The corpse floating in those Spanish waters wasn't a tragic casualty of war. He was a weapon. His name was Major William Martin, and he never existed. Welcome to the story of Operation Mincemeat. The elaborate lie that changed the course of World War II involved a homeless man's corpse, a beautiful woman who never knew she was part of a conspiracy, and a plan so bizarre that even Ian Fleming, the future creator of James Bond, helped make it happen. By early 1943, the Allies were ready to take the offensive in Europe. After years of brutal fighting in North Africa, the time had come to invade Axis-controlled territory and open a new front. The target was obvious to anyone looking at a map: Sicily. Sicily was the stepping stone to Italy, and from there, the soft underbelly of Europe. It was the logical choice, which meant it was also the most dangerous choice. The Germans knew it. Hitler knew it. If the Allies were going to invade anywhere in the Mediterranean, Sicily was the prime candidate. The island was heavily fortified. German and Italian forces had built up substantial defenses, anticipating exactly what the Allies were planning. An invasion against a prepared enemy would cost thousands of lives, perhaps tens of thousands. The Allies needed an advantage. They needed the Germans to look elsewhere. They needed a deception so convincing that Hitler himself would believe it. Enter the London Controlling Section, the ultra-secret department responsible for strategic deception operations. Led by the brilliant but eccentric intelligence officers of British intelligence, they began to craft a plan that would make the Germans believe the invasion was coming anywhere but Sicily. The core idea was simple but daring. Plant false documents on a corpse, make it look like a courier who died in an accident, let the body wash up where Spanish authorities, known to be sympathetic to the Nazis, would find it, and wait for the Germans to take the bait. But executing this idea, that would require meticulous attention to detail, nerves of steel, and a healthy dose of morbid creativity. The masterminds behind Operation Mincemeat were two intelligence officers who could have stepped out of a spy novel themselves: Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague of Naval Intelligence and Charles Chumley, a flight lieutenant in MI5. Montague was a Cambridge-educated lawyer with a razor-sharp mind for detail. Chumley was an imaginative officer who had already proposed similar deception schemes. Together, they formed an unlikely but effective partnership, working out of the basement offices of the Admiralty in London. They weren't alone. Their team included pathologists, document forgers, military brass, and even Ian Fleming. Yes, that Ian Fleming, who worked in naval intelligence and contributed ideas to the operation. Fleming would later use his wartime experiences as inspiration for the James Bond novels, and elements of Operation Mincemeat would find their way into his fiction. The first challenge was finding a body. This wasn't just any corpse they needed. It had to be the right age, the right build, and most importantly, it had to have died in a way that would be consistent with drowning at sea. They couldn't use a soldier killed in combat. The injuries would be wrong. They needed someone who had died from pneumonia or similar conditions that could mimic drowning. After discreet inquiries, they found their man, Gylwen Michael, a 34-year-old homeless Welshman who had died from ingesting rat poison containing phosphorus. It was likely suicide, though the exact circumstances remain unclear. Michael had no family to ask questions, and his death was recent enough that his body could be preserved. The coroner and Michael's legal representatives agreed to release the body for special duties, without knowing the full details. Gylwen Michael would become someone else entirely. Someone with a name, a rank, a fiancé, and a mission that would outlive him. Now came the extraordinary work of creating a person from nothing. The corpse needed an identity that would withstand scrutiny from German intelligence, one of the most sophisticated spy networks in the world. They named him Captain, Acting Major, William Martin of the Royal Marines. The name was chosen deliberately. William Martin was common enough that it wouldn't raise suspicions, but specific enough to seem real. They gave him a date of birth, a service number, and a plausible military background. But Montague and Chumley understood that the Germans would investigate. A name and rank weren't enough. They needed to create a life. So they created pocket litter, the everyday items a real person would carry. They started with identity papers, carefully aged and worn. Then came the inspired touches. Ticket stubs from a London theatre, a bill from his club, a stern letter from his father about an overdraft at Lloyd's Bank amounting to £79. They gave him keys, coins, and receipts. They added a receipt for an engagement ring. Major Martin was recently engaged, you see. They even included a photograph of his fiancée, a beautiful woman named Pam. The photo was actually of an MI5 clerk named Jean Leslie, who had no idea her picture was being used for this purpose until years later. But the masterstroke was the letters. They created intimate correspondence between Martin and Pam. Sweet, slightly awkward love letters that felt genuinely real. One letter began, "The bloodhound has left his kennel for half an hour, so I am writing a quick letter before he returns." These weren't the sanitized, formal documents of military fiction. They were messy, human, and utterly convincing. There were also practical items. A photograph of Martin's father, a replacement identity card application explaining he'd lost his previous one, even some used bus tickets. Every detail was considered, every item designed to tell a consistent story. They dressed the body in full Royal Marines uniform, complete with boots that were slightly worn to suggest they'd been used. The briefcase that would be chained to his wrist was made to look official but not too important, just important enough to be carrying sensitive documents. Now for the crucial element. The documents that would fool Hitler. These had to be important enough that the Germans would believe them, but planted in a way that seemed accidental rather than deliberate. The main deception document was a personal letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Sir Harold Alexander, Commander of British forces in North Africa. The letter was a masterpiece of misdirection. Written in a casual, chatty tone between old colleagues, the letter mentioned that the Allies were planning major operations against Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily being used merely as a cover story to fool the Germans. It mentioned troop movements, discussed medals and promotions, and even included jokes, all designed to seem like genuine correspondence that just happened to contain sensitive information. A second letter from Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham provided corroboration. It introduced Major Martin as a specialist in landing craft and asked Cunningham to return him quickly after he'd reviewed certain plans. The genius of these letters was their indirection. They didn't trumpet, "We are invading Greece." They let the information slip naturally, the way it might in genuine correspondence between officers who assumed their communications were secure. There were also other documents in the briefcase, photographs of military installations, though carefully selected to support the false narrative, and various authentication papers that would confirm Major Martin was indeed carrying official dispatches. The question was, would the Germans believe it? Intelligence services are inherently paranoid. They question everything. The whole operation could collapse if German analysts smelled a rat. By late April 1943, everything was ready. The body had been kept preserved in dry ice, stored in a special canister. The uniform had been fitted. The briefcase had been packed and chained to the wrist. Major William Martin was ready for his final mission. The body was transported in secret to Scotland, loaded aboard the submarine HMS Seraph. The submarine's commander, Lieutenant Norman Jewell, was briefed on the operation, though even he didn't know all the details. He knew only that he was carrying a body that needed to be placed in the water off the coast of Huelva, Spain. Why Huelva? The town had a German intelligence agent known as Adolf Kloss who had excellent contacts with Spanish authorities. Spain was officially neutral but leaning toward the Axis powers. The British knew that any documents found on a British officer would quickly make their way to German hands. On April 30, 1943, the HMS Seraph surfaced in darkness about a mile off the Spanish coast. The crew carefully brought the canister on deck. They opened it and placed the body in the water, positioning it so the currents would carry it ashore. Lieutenant Jewell read Psalm 39 over the body, a final dignity for the unknown man who was about to change history. Then they released Major Martin to the sea. The submarine submerged and slipped away into the darkness. Now it was up to the corpse to do its work. The body was discovered the next morning by a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey María. He reported his find to local authorities, who immediately notified the British vice-consul, Francis Haselden. The Spanish also notified the military. Exactly as the British had planned, the documents were examined by Spanish intelligence before being passed to the British. The Spanish photographed the papers and shared them with their German contacts. Within days, the documents were in Berlin. Back in London, Montague and his team waited anxiously. They had planted subtle indicators in the documents, microscopic marks and specific fold patterns that would tell them if the papers had been opened and read. When the briefcase was eventually returned by the Spanish authorities with profuse apologies, British intelligence carefully examined it. The seals had been broken. The letters had been opened, read, photographed, and carefully resealed. Someone had even tried to replicate the original fold patterns. The Spanish, and through them the Germans, had taken the bait. But would they believe it? The British couldn't know for certain what was happening in German intelligence headquarters. All they could do was launch the invasion of Sicily on schedule and hope their deception had worked. Meanwhile, Major Martin was buried with full military honors in the cemetery at Huelva. The tombstone read William Martin, born March 29, 1907, died April 24, 1943, beloved son of John Gielwend W.R. Martin and the late Antonia Martin of Cardiff, Wales. The date of death was adjusted to fit the cover story. Even in death, the fiction continued. In Berlin, German intelligence analyzed the documents thoroughly. The head of German military intelligence, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, was initially skeptical. He'd been in the intelligence game too long to take anything at face value. But the documents checked out. The paper was right. The signatures appeared genuine. The letters contained information that seemed too specific and casual to be fabricated. Most importantly, the intelligence fit what the Germans already suspected. They knew the Allies were planning a Mediterranean invasion. They knew Sicily was the obvious target. So when documents appeared suggesting Sicily was a feint and the real targets were Greece and Sardinia, it confirmed their belief that the Allies were trying to be clever. The Germans saw through the deception, or thought they did. They concluded that Sicily was indeed a cover story, exactly as the fake documents suggested. They had outsmarted the British by seeing through their obvious plan. Hitler himself was convinced. He ordered troop reinforcements sent to Greece and Sardinia. German military planners shifted resources away from Sicily. They prepared for invasions that would never come. The British got confirmation their plan had worked through Ultra, their top-secret program to decode German communications. They intercepted messages showing German troop movements away from Sicily. They read German intelligence assessments accepting the false information as genuine. Churchill was delighted. Montague and Chumley had pulled off the impossible. A dead homeless man had fooled the Führer. On July 10, 1943, Operation Husky began. Allied forces, including American, British, and Canadian troops, launched the invasion of Sicily. It was one of the largest amphibious operations of the war, involving nearly 3,000 ships and landing craft. Thanks to Operation Mincemeat, the defenders were unprepared. German forces in Sicily were under strength, with key units having been diverted to Greece and Sardinia. The Italians, already demoralized, put up weak resistance in many areas. The invasion wasn't easy. War never is. There were fierce battles, particularly around German strongpoints. American forces under Patton and British forces under Montgomery competed as much with each other as they fought the enemy. But the Allies established their beachheads, pushed inland, and within weeks had control of the island. The cost in Allied lives was significantly lower than it would have been if the Germans had been fully prepared. Operation Mincemeat had saved thousands of lives. British, American, Canadian, and others. The homeless man who had died alone in London had posthumously become one of the war's most successful soldiers. Sicily's fall led directly to the invasion of mainland Italy. Mussolini was overthrown. Italy switched sides. The Germans were forced to defend yet another front, stretching their resources even thinner. The strategic impact rippled throughout the war. The success in the Mediterranean allowed the Allies to plan the Normandy invasion with more confidence. They knew that strategic deception could work on a massive scale. Operation Mincemeat remained classified for years after the war. The first public account came in 1953 when Ewan Montague published his book, The Man Who Never Was, which became a bestseller and was later adapted into a film. For decades, the true identity of the body remained classified. Montague's book referred to him only as the man who never was. It wasn't until 1996 that researchers definitively identified the corpse as Llywr Michael, the homeless Welshman who had died from rat poisoning. There's a certain tragedy in Michael's story. He lived in poverty and obscurity, and his death was likely a suicide. He had no family to mourn him. Yet in death, he served his country in a way few others could. The man who had been invisible in life became indispensable in death. The grave in Huelva remains a point of pilgrimage. The tombstone still identifies the occupant as William Martin, though a plaque was added acknowledging Llywr Michael's true identity. British veterans and historians visit regularly to pay respects to the man whose sacrifice was secret even from himself. Jean Leslie, the MI5 clerk whose photograph was used as Major Martin's fiancée, didn't learn of her role until years later. She was surprised and somewhat amused to discover she'd been engaged to a man who never existed. She remained friends with Montague for the rest of his life. Montague himself went on to become a judge after the war, though he never stopped being asked about Operation Mincemeat. He died in 1985, proud of the role he'd played in deceiving Hitler and saving lives. Operation Mincemeat has become the gold standard for military deception operations. It's studied in intelligence schools around the world as an example of how to construct a convincing cover story and how attention to detail can make or break an operation. The operation succeeded because of several factors. First, the intelligence team understood their enemy. They knew how German intelligence operated, what they would look for, and what would convince them. Second, they paid obsessive attention to detail. Every element of Major Martin's identity was carefully crafted and cross-referenced. Third, they understood human nature. The love letters, the overdraft notice, the theater tickets. These mundane details made Martin real in a way that official documents alone never could. The operation also benefited from luck and from German preconceptions. The Germans wanted to believe that Sicily was a feint because it seemed too obvious. Operation Mincemeat told them what they already suspected, which made the lie easier to swallow. Modern intelligence agencies still use variations of the Mincemeat playbook. The principle remains the same. Create a deception so detailed and so consistent that it becomes more believable than the truth. The operation has inspired countless books, films, and documentaries. A 2021 film, also titled Operation Mincemeat, brought the story to a new generation. The story has entered popular culture as one of World War II's most colorful episodes. Proof that truth is often stranger than fiction. Operation Mincemeat reminds us that war is fought with creativity as much as with weapons. While tanks and aircraft dominated the battlefields, a frozen corpse with a briefcase chained to his wrist changed the strategic balance in the Mediterranean. The operation also raises interesting ethical questions. Was it right to use Llywr Michael's body without his consent or his family's knowledge? The men who planned Operation Mincemeat believed the answer was yes, that the lives saved justified the means. Michael's body was treated with respect and given a proper burial. He received in death the dignity and purpose he'd been denied in life. There's something almost Shakespearean about the whole affair. A man who was nothing becomes everything. Corpse changes the course of history. The powerless become powerful. Death defeats tyranny. Major William Martin was a fiction, but his impact was real. The documents he carried were forgeries, but the lives they saved were genuine. He was the man who never was, but who mattered more than most people who actually lived. In the cemetery at Huelva, the gravestone tells part of the story, but not all of it. It can't convey the ingenuity of Montague and Chumley, the bravery of the submarine crew who delivered the body, or the extraordinary effort required to fool the German intelligence machine. It certainly can't tell the story of G.L. Wend W.R. Michael, the real man behind the fake major. We know little about his life. We don't know what dreams he had, what disappointments drove him to despair, what he might have become if circumstances had been different. But we know this. In the spring of 1943, his body became a weapon that helped win a war. In the annals of World War II, among the generals and heroes, the battles and the victories, there's a place for the man who never was, the corpse that fooled Hitler. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of World War II's most ingenious operations, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from history. Leave a comment below. What do you think about the ethics of Operation Mincemeat? Was it a brilliant stroke of genius or a troubling use of a person's remains? Let's discuss. The war was full of similar deception operations, from inflatable tanks to phantom armies. Operation Mincemeat was just one thread in a larger tapestry of lies designed to save lives by misleading the enemy. Thanks for watching. Remember, in war, as in espionage, nothing is quite what it seems. Not even a corpse floating in the Spanish surf.